happy you could join us on National Name Yourself Day. I don't know if Shane knows that that's what I picked for the National Day here, but I picked it partially with him in mind because something that the fans might not know about him is that he did kind of name himself to a degree because he goes by his middle name versus his first name. But I don't know how that came along, if that's what you were called when you were younger, or if you decided not to go with your first name yourself.
So I had no choice in the matter. That's all I knew. And I don't know what age that I was told your first name is Michael and you go by your middle name. I don't know when that happened. My sister did the same thing. They called her by her middle name. So she has a first name that goes unused, but she has to sign it on documents, and she goes by her middle name. So I've had to figure that out along the way as a kid. And then when it got to, filling out forms for college and the first college class roll call, they're Michael Graham, and I'm like,
Who's that?
Who's that guy?
Yeah.
And that would happen when I went to a new school. In fact, a funny story, we traded schools one year, and I went to this new elementary school. This was the first grade. And everyone's calling me Mike, Michael, Mike. And I'm just ignoring them because I'm not used to hearing that. And I ended up almost being scarred by that because I think I was in that tweener age where I was the youngest in the grade to a degree, but also not the youngest. I was like one of the young. I don't know. I might have been the youngest in that grade, and I probably should have been held back. Well, I was held back that year or the year before, or one way or the other, without confusing the story. I was a year ahead of what I was used to, like with kindergarten. They put me in this second grade class. I just wasn't ready for it. They halfway through the year put me back down in the first grade, and I said, "Please, can I go by Shayne? Like I can't. I tried it. It's not going to work." And then I found out after that smoothed over, the backstory is Shayne was my dad's dog's name. So I was named after my dad's dog.
I think I remember you mentioning that, but I didn't get the full story
and
of that.
I'm not sure if that was named after the old Western. I think that's what it was, but then I don't know why they put a Y in it.
Right.
So everyone still spells my name wrong, even though they know it's my middle name or don't know it's my middle name. But today, filling out official documentation, I don't even know if I know how to write my first name in cursive, so it's just a squiggly line.
Oh, well, that's the nice part. Nobody really learns cursive anymore anyways. It's kind of being exiled here. But yeah, that's why. So I'm curious if you have a name that you would choose then. I mean, since you didn't I was wondering if you had chosen that. You didn't choose it. It was chosen for you. Obviously, both names were chosen for you in the first place anyways. But I always think names are interesting. And, like, I have a fairly plain name. I like my name. I don't have any problem with it. But you could go a little bit crazier with the name. A couple weeks ago, we talked about some of the more interesting names in sports. But also, if you choose something crazy, you kind of have to live up to the name too. I always think of it that way.
And a lot of athletes get nicknames, whether it's because of their on the field tendencies or their personality or whatever, or their looks. I've always tended to not like self-given nicknames because I feel like they're very prideful. In today's world, you got guys that give themselves nicknames that are so kind of like grandstanding and grandiose and look at me like I can't remember. There was a Chad Johnson tried to call himself 7-Eleven one time because he was open 24/7. And it's like, let the fans give you a name, and I had nicknames given to me, but the nicknames that I remember as a kid were Copper Top and Red Top.
Okay.
Those were the two nicknames that really kind of stand out. And then it was when I got into kicking and kind of making a name for myself that I started getting other names that, could be more complimentary. I'll have to admit there's a couple that aren't complimentary, but I never was big on athletes giving themselves the nicknames.
At one point when I was trying to look up something on your Wikipedia, and are you aware that your Wikipedia has you as the franchise as your nickname?
I remember that. I don't know if that was a sarcastic nickname or what. I was franchise tagged one year in Cincinnati, and I think the fans maybe did that as a little bit of a I don't know what the word you would call that, a spoof or something.
Yeah,
because
little
they
satirical.
franchised the kicker instead of some other player. I think I had the nickname Shank Graham.
Oh,
because
always with the play on words.
You miss a kick.
Yeah.
And, Shank. One of my friends called me Shankum Graham because he thought it was funny. But then there was Golden Graham, Money Graham, anything where you use a gram. Sugar Shayne, I think that came out because of the boxer. I can't think of any others off the top of my head, but I think I just preferred just something that had to do with my personality, or mom called me Shayne the Pain. Other than that, personality or looks, hair, things like that, I could never, just can't fathom giving myself a nickname for sports.
Well, that is the interesting part about all of this with the nicknames, because people are not very creative. It's usually just a rhyme or taking one trait. Like you said, you have red hair, so that's going to be a reference for people. People are not very creative about these kinds of things. I think we were trying to get Batman to stick because you said something about Batman, and I'm going to try to champion Batman for you because I agree with you. I don't think you can make your own nickname. I'm not surprised that your former teammate Chad Johnson / Ocho Cinco tried to name himself because he renamed himself anyway.
Yeah, he went and legally had his name changed to a remedial version of Spanish of his name that doesn't even read the way it's supposed to be, but whatever. Ocho Cinco is not how you say 85, but I'll leave the Spanish for more educated people. And I think there are other guys that, a lot of defensive backs gave themselves nicknames that had to do with, like Revis Island and other people. I can't remember all the, prime time, but he's one of those guys that probably could get away with it. Some of them are just ridiculous, like some of the rapper names, some of the, I don't know if there's other musicians that have nicknames like that, but I think nicknames are funny. I could never name myself. Just can't do it.
Well, the 7-Eleven one is funny. Chad can't be the only one to use that. I don't know if he was the first one, but I know that because so I've got my buddy here in studio, and we're both Hoosiers alumni, and that's how we met. And they have a receiver that's going into the pros, Elijah Surratt, that he's Waffle House because he's always open. Same thing. It's just a different version. But it's funny to me because I get that it's a compliment ultimately because you're talking about always being open as a receiver. But is Waffle House really a complimentary nickname? Is 7-Eleven really a complimentary nickname?
I obviously get the reference. I don't know if you want to go with IHOP. You could have a couple different meanings out of all that. Maybe they jump really high, or they're also open 24 hours, I believe.
Yeah.
Waffle House. You know what? When I think about Waffle House, I don't have too many super fond memories of those after hours adventures.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say I haven't had any, but I don't know if I can say they were the most fond of memories.
Much like you were talking about how IHOP could be a bit of a homonym for a nickname where it could take on multiple definitions. I think that for Waffle House too. It's like Waffle House. Okay, so are you? Is your hygiene up to up to snuff? Like what are we doing here?
Smell a certain way?
Yeah,
Are
like
you
what?
greasy?
Do you really like breakfast food? What's going on here? So that's. But I think that's a funny one here. We got Aaron on the board. AA Ron's on the board. Everybody calls him AA Ron. That's his nickname. That's off the Key and Peele bit. Would you like to rename yourself, Aaron?
No, I kind of actually like it.
It's a good one.
Yeah, because I was going to say there's too many other Aarons that I know. So, like, that's how I kind of differentiate myself from the other Aarons.
Yeah, pretty much all the producers have a nickname on the show, and so other than Jeff, I think we have to give him a nickname. I think that's something we'll have to do at some point. He's also a host, but he produces as well. So would you rename yourself? That's what I'm going to ask the guests.
Even I guess if I didn't go into sports and I got into broadcasting, whether it be radio or TV, I know that a lot of people in the broadcast world for TV have a stage name. I had no idea of this until I was about to graduate high school, and I was going into school for journalism and broadcasting, and I found out that one of the local sports guys, his name was Roy Stanley, had a completely different name, but for some reason that became what the news channel wanted him to be called. And then I remembered watching a movie called Broadcast News, maybe.
Okay.
I think it had
That's ringing a
Michelle
bell.
Pfeiffer and the guy in The Natural, Robert Redford. I think they were like on-air talent, and she went by the name Tally, and her name was not Tally, but they made her change her name because it sounded better on air. And I know there's lots of people that do that.
It does make sense, but the other thing that I'm wondering too is, did you ever consider the single letter first name? Like, since you're going by your middle name, M. Shayne Graham, or Michael Shayne Graham, which that's a loaded one because I have a reason I'm asking about that one.
So there is a Facebook that I no longer have access to that is M. Shayne Graham.
Okay.
And that was just something that I did, and now I don't have access to that anymore. I'm sure it's got lots of pictures and stuff I'd love to have off of it. But I think I've always contemplated just legally changing my name to Shayne Graham and just taking the Michael out of it. But then I would be one of those weird people that doesn't have a middle name. And I know people that have that, but I don't know if I just feel like explaining it all the time. I've already gotten so used to explaining I use my middle name that it is what it is.
Yeah, and that's not that odd either. But the reason why I ask about the three names is because there is a little bit of a tie when you go into the people that use three names. You have a more common and strange tie to some of the assassinations that have happened. Some of the, like, there's a lot of those folks that go by the three names. Not that I'm making
like Lee Harvey Oswald.
Exactly.
Or
There's
something.
it's a higher percentage, it seems.
And when I hear people say my full name, Michael Shayne Graham, okay, I think I'm in trouble because that's what my mother would do. Michael Shayne Graham, you get over here, or front and center. And I've even had some people, and this makes me laugh, who say Shayne Michael. So when they say Shayne Michael, part of it could be because they've only known me as one or the other. Or maybe they've known me as both, but they don't truly know the order. Or maybe it just sounds better coming out. I don't know, but I've heard Shayne Michael. I actually heard that recently. And then, when I have people actually, like when I do a Google's team meeting for some of my business stuff,
right,
it comes up as Michael because that's my legal name on Google, and it comes up as Michael Graham. So I've got to tell that whole story of hey, that's my first name. I give them my middle name, blah, blah, blah. So that's interesting that I have to deal with that, but also interesting that I've dealt with that recently of someone calling me Shayne Michael.
Especially at this time in your life where, I mean, you're a celebrity, your name is out there, all of that
I wouldn't say
stuff.
Celebrity. I would say washed up, maybe, but.
We're not putting you in that category. No, I'm trying to champion you being the Batman of the NFL. So we're going the other direction with your promo career here, Shayne. You're on the upward trajectory.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you.
In my mind, but no, that is funny. Well, now you can just put this out as a PSA for anybody that's asking about your name. You can just play them this segment. We'll cut this segment up and just send it to everybody that needs to be corrected on that that particular thing. But we're going to take a break, and we're going to bring on Erik Schlitt of Pride of Detroit. We'll ask him if he might want to change his name, and we'll talk to him about the upcoming draft plans for the Lions and his thoughts on the offseason so far. So stick with us. You're listening to Shayne Graham's Extra Points on Jethro FM. About to talk with Erik Schlitt of Pride of Detroit. Happy to talk to him. He's always got great information. Now, Erik, you have been on the show once prior. The thing of the day is going to be kind of a random one today, so it's not directed at you. There's no judgment of your name, but it's National Name Yourself Day. So would you like to change your name today?
No, no. With my spelling, I'm the only one. So I'm comfortable being one of one here. I'll just keep my name as it is.
Well, it is nice when, like with your X handle and other things, you just get your name. That there is an advantage to that, especially when you're trying to get your name out there.
Oh yeah. My name is it's every handle, it's every social media, every email. It makes everything very universal and easy and recognizable. So I'm comfortable sticking with it.
I think that's a good pick. It's also now people know your name on the beat. You've been on the beat for a while now, and so you're a recognizable name on the beat. And we're glad to have you on the show to represent the Lions and your opinions on them here. So I'm going to start with the draft. We got to talk about the rest of the offseason probably too. But you guys, this is good timing. I didn't know that you were going to have your draft pick just before your appearance on the show. So you made your draft pick in the mock draft, and I'm curious about the thought process. I read about it a little bit, but I'd like to discuss kind of who you picked and why you picked them, and then I have some follow-up questions from there.
So let me put some clarification ahead of this, just so we're on the same page. That's a fan-driven mock draft that we assign to all the different loyal fan people that have that attend Pride of Detroit on a regular basis, and they made the picks leading up to that pick, and then I just made the pick of what was the best available. I have another draft that I put out a week ago that had me versus the computer type of thing, but we're still kind of in the same ballpark. I think the Lions are going to go in one direction, and based on the value of the board, I really feel like most people that offensive tackle is the way to go. So depending on how things fall, I do think there's an order of tackles that they would prioritize, and it's a little bit different than I think the consensus is when you read like any like a Dane Brugler or a Daniel Jeremiah or a lot of the national draft analysts. They're going to have their rankings based on what they believe is just overall talent, where my kind of vision for how the offensive tackles stack up is based purely from a Lions perspective. So what do I think the Lions would do and why I think they would go in that direction? So I'm sorry, did you say you wanted me to talk about a specific guy or just in general, or how do you want to?
Well, what I guess kind of the scenario that you were in, or in either of the drafts, because there is some consensus. There is, I mean, you've been doing this for a long time. Kind of that things get aggregated, so then it ends up kind of being similar for the picks once you get to 17. So it's not like there's almost more likely to be a drop on the actual draft day than there is in some of these aggregated mock drafts that go around, because they just go, well, this guy's got to be off the board at a given time. But you and I, part of the reason I'm leading you down this path is because I do think it's interesting to kind of evaluate what the Lions would do if they have kind of the package of what looks like may be available at that time. Like I believe with the draft that you had with the fans, I think Fano fell to you in that draft, which that seems less likely to me. You'd know better than me on something like that, though.
Yeah, I agree with you. I do think Fano is going to be way earlier than when the Lions are available. But if you do, explore mock drafts, that's something we do on our site. We do a weekly kind of roundup where we kind of look at 40 or so mock drafts from the week and see who's projecting who to fall. He ends up being available in a lot of mock drafts for the Lions because there is a question about his arm length. And with offensive tackle, arm length is one of those premium measurements. And if you don't have the proper or appropriate arm length, then, you're not the first person to engage, right? You're instead reacting to a defender engaging with you who might be able to outreach you. And therefore it makes it a different, you have to play a different style of blocking. And so a lot of times when your arm length isn't, at 33 or 34 inches, those offensive linemen will get dinged for it. And some teams will say, oh, that guy isn't a tackle. He's got to play guard or something like that, right? He's got to move inside because he doesn't have the appropriate length. Lions aren't necessarily, a hard-lined team. Like, they have their measurements that they prefer, but they also prioritize talent over measurables. And so a guy like Fano, if he falls, then I think he would be a guy that the Lions would absolutely jump at because he has a mix of, grit, talent, athleticism that I believe makes him one of the top 2 offensive tackles in this class. And I think the Lions wouldn't care what his arm length ends up being because they've shown a history of overlooking certain, prioritized measurables in order to get a more talented player.
I agree. And I guess that's what's interesting to me about this tackle group. I mean, you've been covering the draft and this stuff for a long time, but it seems like, and maybe it's because there's an increased amount of data on the guys, and obviously they're testing everything, and they've got, huge amounts of information like the beast at the Athletic and different things that all come out about the draft. But it just seems like for the nuances of tackle and for that position, I don't know if I can remember a group that all of them are, there's a bunch of them that are graded pretty high, that a bunch of them that have a first round grade, but man, there's a lot of differences between this batch and this group when you're evaluating them at the pro level. I know that's always the case. This just seems like one of the more random groupings to me.
Yeah, what's interesting is that you normally get 1 or 2 guys that are considered like elite. And I don't know if you necessarily have those surefire, like, elite guys because they all do kind of have flaws. But like this draft class, they're almost like a microcosm of this whole draft class because that's kind of how the whole draft class is. There's not really all the players who are considered like elite are at non-premium positions. The bulk of this draft class is going to be kind of in the middle. It's not really great at the top or at the bottom, but in the middle, there's a lot of really good talent that you can find. And the tackle group's kind of like that too. You don't have these guys that demand that they go in the top 10, but you have guys that are good, but they have one little flaw or 2 or that you have to be able to either adjust or compensate for. And so it makes for a little bit of a unique blend. But there's also like 7 of these guys that, and that makes it a bit unusual as well. Like usually it's like 2 to 3 to 4. Instead, there's like 7 of them, but they all have their kind of, thinks, and little like, quirks and stuff. And so it's really going to be what teams prefer and how they rank these guys. And so, like I said, that's why I come at it from what I believe is a Lions perspective, and why I think how I stack those 7 is going to be different than someone that covers another team.
And that's why I want to get into that list. We'll probably do that after the break. But I have a question for Shayne here because I'm curious about we're talking about the tackles being kind of different from each other, but I'm curious how this applies to kickers when you're evaluating them. Obviously you haven't been on the team side evaluating them. You've you've advised teams, you helped Cincinnati go after Evan McPherson and other things. But I'm curious how much nuance there is when teams are evaluating kickers and saying, okay, like they're looking for maybe more distance. Maybe there's things that are oriented towards the kickoff now. Obviously, you want a guy that can kick from deep. But Shayne, what's your thoughts on all of that with the nuances? I know you could probably add a lot of nuance to that answer.
So it's really funny. It's really funny when you see the actual piece of paper with their evaluations. They've got some of the dumbest stuff on there, okay? Such and such body type, such and such frame, this height. And there's like this prototypical size that they think they're looking for. Okay, it doesn't matter. You got guys that can kick the ball a long way that are 5'8", 5'7". You got guys that are 6'3", 220, 170. It doesn't matter. Cam Little is not a very big guy. He's not short by any means, but he's a very small guy, kind of wiry, but has hit 65-plus yard field goals in games. It's funny when you see that because it kind of reminds me of the movie Moneyball when they're all sitting around the table and they're like, oh, well, this guy, and they're naming off like the old school, like stereotypical, language that they use. And then you've got Brad Pitt sitting there saying, blah, blah, blah. That's not going to find us what we need, blah, blah, blah. I think what they're looking for is, one, who can do the physical skill, whether it's, they've done it in games or they've done it in workouts or tryouts or pro days and all that kind of stuff. But really, they try to interview these guys and get inside their head. And it's such a hit and miss thing. If it was a surefire thing to find out who's mentally tough, there might be guys that don't get drafted when you find out, because you really don't know. There's guys that are kings of their campus, and they never saw a flinch of negativity in their college career, and they get drafted. They go to the NFL, and it's a whole different world. Because you don't have a campus that loves you and you've got 4 to 5 years of guaranteed scholarship, you are potentially on the couch the next week. And that's a whole different type of mindset to have when you line up for a field goal. So you can't always test those mental things, but they try to put them through hypotheticals. And, I think a lot of guys are really good at saying what they think needs to be heard. But they really do try to get a mindset of we already know that these guys have the physical talent. There are tons of guys with physical talent. They're going to go with who's done it under duress, in a setting on the field. But when they run you through these things, coaches are going to try to say things to you and see how you react to it. So, you've seen some of these pro day videos where you see the coaches kind of talking to the players off script a little bit. They're trying to get in their heads a little bit. And part of that is, anytime you do a hypothetical, it's never going to be the same as, 70,000 fans, millions of TV viewers, fan bases that will rip you apart on Twitter, or X, whatever you want to call it. There's no way to replicate that, but they think that they can get a baseline based on certain things. And that's, I'm actually in the industry of mindset performance. And Wendy, when she comes on, she can talk about this more. But we're trying to come up with a way to actually scope someone's ability to have that visceral access and how they handle things so that you can almost give them a score as to how their mind works. But it's never going to be 100%. You're never going to be completely sure until someone goes through it. But that's what teams are trying to do. They're trying to get a scope of the mental part, because the physical part as a kicker is really easy. High, far, down the middle. That's it. Doesn't matter what you look like, in my opinion. But they want to know who can actually handle when things go bad. And sometimes you don't know until things go bad.
You'd almost have to go back to kind of my background because in intelligence, there's a lot of vetting that you have to go through. And yeah, there's a lot of unique testing that we had to go through because a lot of it was mindset, breaking point, all of that. I know Wendy worked with Navy SEALs and different things like that. That would be the kind of thing that would be in that realm. So yeah, that's an interesting answer, but I totally get it. It kind of reminds me of the conversation we had with Jake Moody to a degree, because when you described, hey, the big man on campus, and then goes into the NFL with a lot of momentum, that made me think of Jake. That's kind of where he was, and then now he had maybe a little bit of a decline after that, but now he's picked himself back up and kind of understood what he's had to grow through there.
And a lot of guys are actually made into who and what they are as a player because of the lessons they have to learn first. I don't know that every guy is just going to be drafted and then have a great career and have no speed bumps along the way. I think some guy, I know with me, I needed to have a little bit of that trial by fire. I needed to be humbled a few times. There's guys that had very, mediocre to below average starts that ended up becoming all pro and being Hall of Famer type level guys that really weren't that spectacular in the beginning. And I think sometimes we need those, iron sharpens iron type moments to kind of feel that. And sometimes, guys don't get the second chance and some guys do. And usually the guys that kind of, stick with it a little bit and create that, rhinoceros skin of tough, mental toughness. They have to go through some downslopes sometimes. And it's just tough because we live in a world of what have you done for me lately and a microwave society where everybody wants it, in and out right now. The world, it's tough to live that way, but, in a world where you get paid a lot of money to do a job and they feel like they can just bring in the next guy, you have to find a way to adapt to that as quickly as possible.
Well said. Yeah, adversity is usually the kind of force change multiplier to making yourself better, to improvement. So yeah, it's an interesting discussion. But we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back with Erik Schlitt and talk about his tackle rankings, because I have a feeling we're going to be pretty similar on at least a couple of them here. But I want to see how he ranks the tackles, since that'll be the most likely position for the Lions to take here in the draft. But stick with us. You're listening to Shayne Graham's Extra Points on Jethro FM. Bringing back Erik Schlitt here, having a good conversation about the Lions. And you're the guy to talk to about this, in my opinion, Erik, because I've been having versions of this conversation about the tackle that they could take. And it's just interesting to me because obviously you're going to get different opinions. It's the way this stuff works. But you and I think, are similarly high on the same guy that I'm starting to hear more of, but you're hearing a lot of Freeling. You're hearing a lot of Proctor. We talked about Fano. There, you got Lomu in the mix somewhere, but I don't think we're hearing the name Blake Miller as much as we should. So I'm curious if he is atop your rankings, or if he's not. I'm curious where he is.
Yeah, I think Maui Noa and Fano are probably the top two tackles in this class, but that next group, the Blake Miller, Monroe Freeling, Caden Proctor, Caleb Lomu, Miller is at the top of that group for me. He's my third offensive tackle. I think he is stylistically a really good fit for them. He has a load of experience, 55 starts, yet he's still just a few months older than some of the other prospects as well. You look at his 55 starts, and often people think, oh, he's like 24 years old or something like that. He's not. He's still 22. He's still a young kid with a lot of developmental upside, but also a lot of experience. He has the right mental attitude. There's a wrestling background that shows up in his game. And to me, I think he is the pick that makes the most sense for them based on who I think is going to be available. Because Mauino and Fano are the guys that I think are going to be off the board in the top 15. And Miller, I think, is the next best guy out of that group. Like you said, Freeling is a guy who's going to get a lot of love. There's recent talk about the Lions being in love with Proctor, and I could totally understand that value as well. There's some flaws to his game that I don't necessarily like as far as their fit with the Lions. There's some off-field stuff that I think needs to be answered, and maybe it has been, but there's some things that give me pause with Proctor. And Lomu, I think, is a good fit, but I just don't think he's quite as talented, and the run blocking portion of his game I don't think is at the level of the other three. And so Miller, I think, is just a complete package. He's a guy who, when the off season kind of started, he was not considered a top guy, and a lot of people had low rankings on him. And as people started studying his film, he was kind of what would consider a late riser, because I think people were just starting to understand the type of player he was and get eyes on him. Because remember, Clemson was bad this year. And so a lot of people turned away from that Clemson tape. And so I think he kind of flew under everyone's radar. And when I started talking about him, I was just trying to get it out there, because he seemed like a very realistic option to me. But most of the national analysts were saying he was like a guy they could get at pick 50. And so I was just trying to get his name out there for fans. But what we've seen is, as people have watched his game, and everybody's kind of getting caught up on what the NFL already knows. I think people are starting to see how Miller fits in with the Lions, and I think it's really quite well.
He feels like a guy that if you asked AI, who would the Lions draft at tackle, and then you got a bunch of traits, it would just be a write-up about Blake Miller. It would be, let's see, he only missed one practice, and it was because it conflicted with the actual surgery for his broken hand, not even because he was sitting out because of a broken hand. He didn't sit out after that. And all the things that you listed, the experience, the wrestling background, there's just not a lot of holes with him. And I guess that him juxtaposed against Proctor is the most interesting one to me, because I know that we're hearing from the national media, and you made a good point that I'm glad you did. This is why you need to be listening to guys like Erik and Pride of Detroit and a lot of the great guys on the beat, because if you get your news from the national folks, doesn't mean it's bad. It's just different. And so if you're getting your Lions news from there, that's where the Proctor report is being circled around. And I do, like you're saying, I do see a lot of positives in him. This is going to ultimately sound kind of negative, but I see him as the other side of this discussion. I see him as a guy that doesn't strike me as maybe a great fit for the Lions for a lot of the reasons that you listed.
Yeah, look, with Miller, like you said, he's off the bus ready to go. He looks like a guy who can step in and give them quality starts day one, and you don't have to worry about him. With Proctor, you're banking on his upside, right? You're looking at the fact that they interviewed him at the Combine, which is an indicator that they're at least interested in him. He's training with offensive line guru Duke Manyweather, and the Lions have a history of drafting guys that train with Duke. They stylistically line up with the type of guys that he trains. Proctor has rare size and movement, and I think he could play on the right side. I think he could. A lot of people have mentioned he could probably kick in the guard if he needed to. But the questions for me are more along the lines of, hey, you transferred from Alabama back to Iowa, because he's from Iowa. But you transferred to Iowa, and you were there for 2 months. And the rumors on you bailing was because, you didn't fit in well there and you kind of gave up on them. Well, giving up on an Iowa program doesn't really seem to align with what the Lions want, because they just pluck guys out of that Iowa program, right? Like they like the work ethic that goes into that Iowa program. And so that for me is a huge red flag. Like, why did he go there and then exit? And if he's got a good answer for it, then that might be enough. But from my seat, not knowing that answer, not having had that interview with Proctor, that certainly stands out as a red flag for, was the work too hard? Was he not doing what he was supposed to be doing? I heard there was conflict with coaches. And like those types of problems, they stand out like a red thumb. So like it's those answers that I don't know if I'm going to get the answers to ahead of the draft that cause me some trepidation and ranking him higher than where I have him.
I agree, and that's a big part of why I just don't see that necessarily being a good fit. But that's exactly the conversation that I wanted to have. I also will give you a tidbit because we had Ryan Roberts on, who does the mock draft for A to Z Sports, and he also said he's worried about Proctor's movements because he saw his calves and ankles in person, and he's worried about it. So there's a tidbit for you, Erik. I couldn't even hold back when he said that. I got a laugh out of that. I know there is a lot of physical evaluation, but yeah, he does seem to move well for a big guy.
And look, there's weight concerns too, because when he played in high school, he was 390, and he went to, when he was at Alabama those first couple of years, they were comfortable with him living at that weight. And then he started to get some NFL evaluators say, you got to drop that weight and you got to get slimmer and you got to show that you can move because you're not going to play in the NFL at 390. That's just not realistic. And so he dropped the weight, but can his frame actually support that 355 pounds, where he's at now? Or will he put that weight back on? Maybe getting in a room with Panay solves all these problems that we were talking about here. But then again, are they willing to gamble on that when they have a guy like Blake Miller that might be sitting on the board that doesn't have all of these questions and concerns and has the mentality that fits that locker room?
It's not at all the same situation. I'm not comparing the situations, but it kind of reminds me of when Dan was talking about when I think it was when they were going to possibly add Jalen Carter into the mix, and they were trying to do a lot of the off the field evaluation because obviously the on the field stuff was pretty clear at that point. But they were doing off the field evaluation, and he was talking about, hey, you can only add a couple of these guys before you kind of change the culture to what you're worried about. And they're obviously very protective of the culture. So if you do have a guy that you're maybe a little bit worried about quitting on the team or having some off the field issues, like I think it's a legitimate concern. I think that would probably raise their level of concern as a result, because they're looking at him going, okay, yeah, why did this happen? But like you said, Erik, we don't know the answer to that. Maybe it was a good explanation and they're satisfied with it.
Yeah, that's the hard part about being an evaluator, is that you are trying to make judgments when you don't have a full picture, right? And the Lions, they've got the interview, they've done their interviews, they've done their homework, they've done their research, they've talked to the coaches, they've had access at a level that we just don't have. And so, we can speculate what we think makes the most sense based on the information we have. But if Proctor, has legitimate answers for those and they think he has a bigger upside, then, he could certainly be a guy that they have ahead. But from where we're at and what we're looking at, it certainly looks like he's maybe not a clean fit.
It's a great discussion. I'm glad you came on and talked with us about that. I want to make sure to promote where people can follow you here, and we'll be sure to kind of check in with you after the draft and talk more about the offseason as a whole and what you thought about the draft. But be sure to tell people where they can follow you until then.
Yeah, the best way to get all of my information and all the stuff that I write is over at Pride of Detroit. Like we mentioned at the top, all my social medias are just my name, Erik with a K, Schlitt, Schlitt. You can find me on Twitter, Blue Sky. I have a podcast that I do with Pride of Detroit. I have a podcast that I do on my own with one of my longtime buddies. That's called the Detroit Lions Breakdown Podcast. I have a Lions Draft Board that I put out on that podcast's Patreon page. So if you're interested in subscribing for that, that's just you just Google Detroit Lions Breakdown Patreon, and you'd be able to get access and check that out. And I put up a big draft board that has like the players, my rankings, depth charts, all kinds of salary cap stuff and whatnot. And if you have questions or you're wondering, you can send me a message on Twitter, send me a DM, or even just send a message to me outright. And I usually have Twitter up all the time, so I'm always happy to answer what I can. So those are the best ways to get a hold of me.
Be sure to follow him. He's got a lot of great information and great stuff, and we appreciate you joining us, and we'll look forward to talking to you again soon.
All right. Thanks, Ryan.
All right.
Have a
Thanks,
good one.
Erik. You too. Thanks to Erik Schlitt. Appreciate him coming on. We're going to come back in studio with Shayne here after the break, so stick with us. You're listening to Shayne Graham's Extra Points on Jethro FM. Coming back here with Shayne in studio, it kind of made me think of a question here because Shayne's been doing a lot of evaluation. Yeah, we talked to him about kickers because let's face it, he's one of the leading experts in the country, in the world, on kicking. So we like to get his opinion on that. But he's got vast knowledge of football, and he's been in a ton of locker rooms on both the player and coach side. But this is an issue that's interesting to me because I'm a large framed guy. I've done a lot of weightlifting. I've had different kinds of weight on my frame at all different times in my life. And so I can kind of understand when Erik's talking about a guy like Caden Proctor, who he's a large man. He's 6'7". He's got the bone structure to be able to put on a lot of muscle and maybe some other things in addition to it. And let's not, make any bones about it. At the NFL level, sometimes they do want you to have both. It's not just if you're an offensive lineman or defensive lineman, it's not all going to be muscle. They want you to have mass that you can then move. But I'm curious how they address that issue as a whole in the NFL, because obviously there's probably some guys that come into camp and they say, "Hey, we got to get you, we got to get you into the cafeteria. We got to get you in, and we got to bulk you up." Mm-hmm. And then there's other guys that they go, maybe like a Caden Proctor that was at one time 390, and they got to go, okay, we got to manage this a little bit because we need you to be slightly more nimble than you are.
So I've actually seen, this is one of the untitled descriptions on like a strength coach, okay, is managing the players' physical health, not internally, but like their physical abilities, right? So they're getting guys stronger in the weight room. I've seen strength coaches walk up to guys in the cafeteria and say, "That's what you're going to eat," and pick their plate up and throw it away, because they were guys that don't need to be eating what's on that plate because they're supposed to be losing weight or whatever it may be. I've seen it quite a few times where a guy reports to training camp considerably overweight, and they have a thing that we always called it fat camp, which meant while the rest of the team is going through drills and team period and, installing plays and the individual periods are all kind of technique and understanding like this is the technique you use on this play and this scheme. And then when you're, kind of the basic fundamentals, and then you move into what they call pods or, sectionals where you work, 9-on-7 and the skill guys are doing their thing, but then like the linemen are still doing their thing separately. And then you get the team where everybody works together. And that's how you kind of make your team get through the playbook and be able to execute them. Well, when you have guys that are over on the other field and they're doing exercises with a strength coach that basically has to babysit them to make them do extra exercising to lose weight, and their meals are being monitored. They're told like, "Hey, there's going to be a weigh-in this week, and you're going to be fined 900 pounds or $900 per pound." It may be over 1,000 now. I'm not sure. It used to be per pound per day because they would keep weighing you.
Okay.
But then they found that guys were taking extreme measures and sitting in the sauna too long, and it was creating some health risks. But You see these guys, and their priority has to be losing weight. And that's not an easy thing to do for anyone, much less, someone in the 400-pound range, or, maybe someone who needs to be 260, but they're 320, like a linebacker or a fullback or something. You see them taking their time and energy through fat camp, and then you're like, when are they going to learn the plays? When are they going to get to actually practice and take the contact and get their body used to football versus just exercise? And you never know what somebody's going through when they get to that point to gain that weight, but also, like, your job is to be prepared and be ready. And if you show up to training camp, then obviously something distracted you from your job. And if your job is a pro football player, you're like a race car, and you have to take care of your race car. Give it the best gas, give it the best maintenance, take care of it. But if you're showing up and you've got all that extra weight and you can't perform, those coaches know when it comes to cubic inches of the space that you fill, how efficient can you be at a certain cubic inch. And, it's kind of the terminology they use is, the bigger guys are cubic inches. They're just a different type of measurement than everybody else. So if you have so much space that your body takes up, but you can't efficiently move within that space, that's when they try to get you to lose weight. And everyone thinks about, linemen are just big fat guys and all that. These guys, honestly, a lot of these guys, when they take their shirt off, yes, some of them have a little roly-poly belly. Some of them have the outlines of six-packs, and they're 330 pounds. And, I think I saw it was a D lineman or an O lineman that ran like a 4.8 at the combine. I don't remember who it was, but, you see guys that can move like that, and you're like, this is a whole new standard of athlete that can be that big and move that way. And then you see some guys that just look like they're complete, the Hamburglar or Grimace, and you're like, how was this guy? And this guy's in the Hall of Fame. And everybody's different. But it's a matter of understanding your personnel. There's a phrase we use called KYP, know your personnel. And you got to know your players. If they can move with the weight, let them play. But some guys can't. And you have to understand your personnel. Are they physically able to perform their skill and their technique without being a liability to the team?
It's a great point because, it's all shapes and sizes. Please tell me that someone was nicknamed Grimace. That's what I want to know.
Yes, and I gave him that nickname, and I will not say who it is.
I'm not asking that question. I framed my question specifically so that we don't dox this guy.
I'll say this indirectly, okay? He tried to give me a hard time over missing a kick in a game. We were friends, but we weren't close, okay? So he tries to give me a hard time. So I politely raised my hand and asked the flight attendant on our charter plane, hey, can you get an extension for his seatbelt? He's having a hard time fitting in his chair. And then that was it after that, because he got all mad and got all up in his feelings. And it's like, dude, if you want to give it out, you got to be able to take it.
That's a big one. I tell people that all the time because usually it's the people that do give it out. It's mostly an insecurity or something that really means that they can't take it.
Yeah.
And when you do direct it back and just return to sender, you weren't it wasn't unsolicited. You had already gotten something from him and
won't be none.
Exactly. Yeah. you sent it back to him. You're playing a little game of tennis and you sent it back his way. But that's funny. Just the nickname of Grimace is just hilarious to me. That's why I asked. But there's a lot of good stuff in there. We'll have to follow up on some of it, but we got to take a quick break and let Shayne go here. But we're going to follow up on some of that discussion because I think that could be a longer form discussion about kind of body types and how because they are amazing body types. You mentioned the lineman. I'm not sure about any this year, but Jordan Davis was one that ran that. It ran very fast at a 3:30 at a defensive tackle. So yeah, it is amazing. But we'll take a quick break here and then come back in studio. Stick with us. You're listening to Shayne Graham's Extra Points on Jethro FM.
From the GarberiноRoofs.com studios in Granville. Country with a Twist. Jethro FM. 1530 AM. WYGR Wyoming Grand Rapids. 94.9 FM Grand Rapids. 99.5 FM Lowell. And Jethro South. 980 AM WAKV Otsego Plainwell. 98.9 FM Otsego. And 105.1 FM Kalamazoo. Available worldwide at jethro.fm.
Coming back here in studio, we got AA Ron on the board, as I mentioned, and then we have my buddy Steve Corsi. He's in town visiting me. He's a fellow IU alumnus here, and he's a big Steelers fan, so we may actually cover some Steelers with him. But I want to talk to Aaron about something, because Aaron's got a good eye for football. He's a coach. He knows what he's doing in that realm, and he was telling me that he was kind of high on Caden Proctor, but then maybe Erik and I changed his mind a little bit. So I'm curious. I'm curious how you took in that interview here, Aaron.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing was like culture fit. I think somebody who's ready to play, and then that's the thing too. It's like, are you looking for a project, or are you looking for what's going to help you now? I think the Lions at this point are in more of a, like, we need to get younger, but we need to be able to win right now. And it just seems like Cam Miller is a better fit for that situation. The only reason why I said Proctor is I seen some of his highlights when he was at Alabama, and I was like, he's a freak athlete. But, I mean, if he's a project and it's kind of more of a raw talent thing, I mean, he'd be a good, backup, but he wouldn't obviously be there later in the, draft. But I'm thinking if you need somebody to play now, Cam Miller is probably the best pick.
You can see why teams would be interested in both of them. Whenever I talk about Proctor, I feel like it comes out as kind of negative. It's not supposed to be negative. I try to look at everything through the eyes of the Lions, and he just doesn't necessarily seem like the best fit for what they're looking for. But make no mistake about it. I mean, say he went to a team. Let's throw out a team like the Eagles, that they're good on the offensive line now, but they might be offloading Lane Johnson soon because he's towards the end of his career. He waits behind him for a year, learns from him. They're used to converting somebody like Mailata into the force that he is now. I could see him being very appealing and therefore very successful for a team like that. It's not that I don't see him being successful. It's just that I don't know if I see the Lions being a perfect culture fit. But as I mentioned, we've got a Steelers fan in studio here, and I'm curious about this because where the Steelers are picking, I do think that offensive line could be in the mix for the Steelers in particular, because you've got there's a lot of resources that have been allocated to the Steelers offensive line up until this point over the last few years. Right. But there's still a bit of a hole at left tackle, could have an upgrade there. And I could see maybe moving somebody in like a Proctor or a Miller or somebody, because the Steelers are known for kind of building in the trenches and building their defense, but they're a real swing team at the point that they are in the draft. They could do anything from that to maybe drafting the second quarterback, right, to a lot of things, because they're now in a new regime with no Tomlin, and so I'll be curious to see what they actually do in the draft, because I think they could be one of those swing teams late in the first round that kind of I don't know, mess up the rest of, kind of surprise everybody else as it goes down the pike.
Right. Yeah, they could go a lot of directions. I don't know what they're looking for specifically in terms of offensive line, what they have now, but I know establishing a good run game is always important to Steelers fans and the team, and if that could help that, certainly protecting old quarterbacks would be good too, or but the run game would be important, certainly.
When we did, so I did a mock draft with the guys from the Michigan Football Network, Jay Sweet and James Gullett, and we all took 9 teams, and Jace had the Steelers. He must have hemmed and hawed over this pick for about 5 minutes, because he was between basically Proctor and Ty Simpson, and taking the second quarterback. He ended up taking Proctor in that draft, but I could see the Steelers kind of being in a similar position and trying to figure out what to fill in there. They've kind of settled the receiver position a little bit, but quarterback's unsettled, could use some offensive line. And you and I are on the same page on this, Steve. I want to talk to you about this, because I know you've been watching this team for a long time, and I've always been a Mike Tomlin guy, just like I'm a Dan Campbell guy. He's, to me, Dan Campbell is the Mike Tomlin of Detroit, and I hope he lasts a long time. I don't think Mike Tomlin lasted long enough. I think the Steelers fans got I don't know, a little too used to maybe the past or something like that. But were you surprised that they got rid of him here with his level of success that he's had?
Yes and no. I was surprised just that he did step down at the time that he did. It felt like there was still some years to go. Like I've said, I like I'm in the minority. I loved him there and wanted him to be there as long as he wanted to be there. I felt like, and I think overachieved, especially the last couple of seasons with what was expected, with what we had. To make the playoffs, win the division last year. I mean, that was, I think, a pretty good feat. Breaks came their way, but yeah, I think he did a good job with what we had all the time. So yeah.
Aaron, you're a coach. You have to me, continuity is very important with this sort of thing. And the fact that the Steelers have barely changed their coach, this is what I worry about a little bit, to be honest with you, with the Lions. Like, people already kind of going after Brad Holmes a little bit. There's some comments on Campbell, not as many, but you did have some people that actually wanted to keep Ben Johnson over Dan Campbell and make Ben Johnson the head coach. I understand I thought Ben Johnson would be a good head coach, but you can't do that for the team that already has the established culture and everything. And I think Dan Campbell is the head of that culture, and that's what I worry about a little bit, because people, even a guy like Mike Tomlin, to me, he's a Hall of Fame coach. He's a guy that's done everything he possibly could, and he still was basically forced out by the franchise that he gave a lot of support to. We're seeing this. I just saw this report from the Eagles. I think Jalen Hurts has played with 11 different offensive coordinators in his career with the Eagles. That lack of continuity has probably affected him maybe not taking the next level. There's something to continuity in football, and saying, hey, this is a guy that knows the culture, knows how we want to play, and they don't have to relearn everything when they arrive here, even if they're an experienced coach. Mike McCarthy is an experienced coach, but it's nice to have the culture established. That's what I'm hoping we'll get with Dan Campbell for the Lions for years to come here.
Yeah, I think continuity is important. The Jalen Hurts example, I think, is a good one, because, like, especially with him, he has a specific skill set. And I think you have to have, like, for the example of offensive coordinators, I mean, he's not your traditional pro-style quarterback. He's mobile, he can run. So I think having guys who have kind of more or less a college background kind of helps, favors him and what he can do. And I think, honestly, that's probably, continuity matters. I think, obviously, with the Tomlin situation, I'm not a Steelers fan, but it was, to me, it didn't seem right. I was like, you win the division, you make the playoffs, and they're like, nah, we don't want you anymore. It just seems bad. But I think continuity is, very important. I just think, at some point, fan bases just probably more or less get annoyed with just, hey, first round and losing. But
yeah.
And then you have other fan bases like the Detroit fan base that it's like, hey, we wouldn't mind going to the playoffs and losing in the first round. Then again, now there's been recent success, and now just falling short of the playoffs is viewed as kind of a large issue based on the expectation. So it's interesting the way this stuff all. I think the expectations get too high with some of this stuff, because only one team can win it. Only two teams can make it to the Super Bowl. One team from each conference, and I think people aren't really analyzing the numbers enough to a degree to say, like, oh, well, they should be doing better. Okay, well, what were all the factors that factored into this? The Steelers have had a host of quarterback issues since Roethlisberger left, and there's all sorts of things that factor into this. So it's just an interesting discussion. Now, I'm going to kind of tease this, I think, for the end, because we're going to bring on Dr. Wendy Borlabi, one of Shayne's colleagues. She's going to be a great resource on mental health and mental acumen in sports. But I'm thinking, I wanted to ask Erik this, but we were kind of running low on time. when we had Al Karsten on last week, he brought up kind of unsolicited his Mount Rushmore of Lions players, and it was the most random collection of Lions players. It was like if you hit a button on the internet and just randomized 4 Lions players, I don't think you could get more random than his list. So what I might tease for the end is us trying to compose a bit of a Mount Rushmore for the Lions or Steelers in your case, Steve, because I think that would be fun to do, and I want to ask more of the Lions pundits about that when they come on. So that might be our homework assignment for after the interview with Dr. Wendy here. But before we get her on, I want to thank our sponsors, Encore Business Group, Erik Hall Aesthetic and General Dentistry, Williams Chiropractic, Elite Winning Solutions, and Sal's Complete Home Painting and Handyman Solutions. Services. We thank them for all their support, and there's a lot of good sponsors on there. So be sure to contact them if you need any support from them. But yeah, that's our homework assignment, fellas. I think we'll do that at the end. But we're going to take a quick break and bring on Dr. Wendy Borlabi of Impact Imagine Group. She works with Shayne. She's been a psychologist in many different fields, but primarily sports. And we'll be having a conversation about mental health and aptitude in sports here after the break. So stick with us. You're listening to Shayne Graham's Extra Points on Jethro FM. Really happy to bring on this next guest. This is Dr. Wendy Borlabi. She has an outfit with Shayne where they deal with mental health and aptitude and mindset. And I'm, as listeners of the show know, I'm very focused on this, given my background in intelligence and the fact that I had to go through a lot of different training and mindset work myself. So happy to bring on Dr. Borlabi to talk about sports psychology. And welcome to the show, Wendy.
Hey, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited for you to be here too, because I have heard your name before. We talked about doing this segment with Shayne, because I had read an article previously about former Piston Andre Drummond, who when he was with the Bulls, he attributed a lot of his improvement and his mental health improving while he was on the Bulls to the team psychologist at the time, which was Dr. Wendy Borlabi.
It was me.
So I want to talk to you about that, because this part is always really fascinating me. I don't think I've told you this, Wendy, but the hook to kind of the show that I do on my own, and then even with this show, is I come from an intelligence background. So I used to work for the Central Intelligence Agency, and we did a lot of things with mindset and different things. So this part of sports always interests me. That's why Shayne and I have kind of hooked up on this level, because we're interested in the high level stuff. We don't want to get into, well, why did the kicker the kicker missed the field goal, or the guy dropped it on 4th and 7. We want to get to the higher level reasons of why all this stuff happens, and you have to address that. So I'm curious how you initially got into this field and kind of your evolution in getting into the field initially, and then getting over to the sports side of things.
Yeah, so it's funny because I tell the story all the time, because it's just a random thing. I literally fell into sports psychology. It was nothing that I knew of or even heard of. I had graduated undergraduate and was working in the field, and a coworker stated to me, would I be interested in going to a sports psych conference with her? Because I was an athlete, and we were in psychology, and so I said yes, because it was in New Orleans and our job was going to pay for it. So I went and had a free weekend in New Orleans. I didn't even attend a single thing from the conference. But then about 3 or 4 years later, I started thinking, what is this sports psych thing? What is this, and what does this really mean? And so as I started looking more into it, I was like, wow, this is an actual, this is a job, this is a career. People do this, and I can see the connection and how it can benefit not only athletes, but just anybody. Once you learn to tap into who you are and your strengths, I'm like, that's pretty unique. And so I just started to, how do I do this? And so then it was get my master's and get my doctorate and just continue on education, because it just seemed to be a perfect fit for me, because one, I love to help people, and two, I love sports. So it was this is my career path. Let's go, right?
Exactly. Well, and I think of a guy like Andre Drummond. This concept that you're talking about makes me think of him, because he's obviously a big, strong, physically imposing guy. He's gotten his frame into very good shape. He's developed muscle and athleticism, and basically maximized probably what he can do with his physical shape. Sure, he can get in the gym and do different things, but a lot of those guys are at peak athleticism and physical condition. But then the part that you can improve is that mental piece, because we can all improve it, as you know better than anybody, and I'm always focused on that. And you can always improve that part, and that's maybe where you have the higher growth arc is, okay. And I think we all learn that to a degree as we get older, because our bodies kind of fail us, and then we say, well, we got to lean on our minds a little bit more. But if you're able to integrate that into sports, I feel like that's a force multiplier there, because you're saying, hey, if you can get a younger guy to understand the capabilities of his mindset, then I might make him into a better player that's able to produce better on the court, on the field, and do better at the negotiating table and everywhere else.
Absolutely, do better in life, right? Because you start off with just what you're saying. You know, when I worked I was at the Olympics for about 8 years, and that's one of the things that I saw that was incredible, was that the athletes were pretty much the same physically, just what you're saying, right? They pretty much were similar, but it was the mental piece. It was how they tapped into who they were, what their strengths were, when to use it, how to use it, and then be open to the fact that they could actually adjust it and change, and that they owned it, right? And that was the piece. So when you're able to get there and you're able to figure those things out, and then you use it, it's just a whole nother ballgame. It's just a whole nother ballgame.
Tell me more about your Olympic work, because I did see that you've gone through some very interesting phases as far as who you're dealing with, the elite of the elite, with all these different things, whether it's the NBA and working with the Bulls, that's the top 1/10 of 1%. These Olympic athletes are the top of their field, and then we'll talk about this in a bit. But you've dealt with the Navy SEALs as well. But tell me about the dealing with the Olympic athletes and kind of how that looked, because it has to be fascinating. I think the everyday person looks at Shayne and I have this conversation all the time. I'm kind of the everyday person, and then Shayne's the elite athlete. And I think the fan has a tendency to look at the elite athlete of, oh, well, they haven't had any problems. They haven't had any mental or physical strife in their life. It's the exact opposite. They've overcome, and we were talking about this in an earlier interview, they've overcome the adversity, and that's what helped make them what they are today, the star and the high performer that they are today.
Yeah, and we don't even have to think about the adversity that they overcome. We could just let's talk about the everyday life. I mean, their everyday life, because think about having a career that you get paid only if you get the top seat, right? So only if you get the first seat, or if you're the leader, or whatever the case may be. In this case, it's the gold medal, or maybe even the silver medal. But that's when you get paid, and you have to get that in order to get paid. So you're going for 4 years, maybe even 8 years, depending on how many times you make the Olympic team. But let's just put it in 4 years for perspective. So for 4 years, you're not getting it paid. You're working out. You're going to work 2 or 3 times a day. You're trying to fundraise to help pay for your bills. You may be living with somebody else because you can't afford a place because, again, you're not making any money. You're not making any money. And let's say you even have a family. So you might be missing out on the kids' different activities because, again, you're working out 2 or 3 times a day. So all of that happens for 4 years, and then you make it to the Olympics. But let's say you don't get on the podium. You haven't made no money. I mean, that's a stressor, right? So I think a lot of the things that when I was dealing with Olympians that they faced was that they struggled on being selfish because they had to be selfish in order to get to the podium. They had to be selfish and miss out on different things in their lives and what they were doing because they needed to work out 2 or 3 times a day. They couldn't work. They needed to focus only on winning the U.S. championships or the world championships or going to European championships, or going to German championships. They had to do all these different things and travel, which means they had to raise money to do that because, again, you have no job. You're not making any money. And I think those are the stressors that Olympians have to face, and that's an everyday thing. And obviously it's a choice, right, to be an Olympian, but I think that's a regular thing that they had to face in addition to overcoming other things as well.
Yeah, imagine having only one shot in 4 years to basically pay off that whole 4-year period. It's incredible.
Right. Yeah, it is. I mean, it's an interesting thing. I mean, there's such differences between working with obviously working with college students and working with Olympians and also work with the NBA. But I mean, I think for the Olympians, I think that was the biggest thing that I saw was just them having to face that, and then being okay with it and still wanting to have that drive to be an Olympian.
I'm glad you brought up kind of the everyday life part, because I talk about that a lot on the shows, how I think we have a tendency to underestimate. Sure, there might be some facets of life that are potentially easier for someone that has already made a larger contract and now I'm talking about more the professional side, in the professional side of things. And yes, there might be some conveniences that you can then pay for, but you still have to deal with everyday life. And by the way, that's like a small percentage of even the people in that sport. In the NBA, yeah, you're on your rookie contract and then you're trying to work your way up. You really haven't made true money. We've talked about this with Shayne on the show, how basically the contracts get advertised of, oh, well, they got paid this much in their contract, but you got to take all the portions out for taxes and the representation. But it is an interesting thing to think about with, it's like when somebody's traded or when they have a personal strife that's attributed to their playing career, they've got to deal with everyday life just like all the rest of us. They have families, they have off-court, off-field issues, and they don't get to avoid them just because they're an athlete.
Correct. This is the way I explain it to people for them to get a really good understanding of what I do and how what these athletes face is that, let's say you have your 8 o'clock meeting and you get to your job late, and your boss is not really happy because you're late, and so after the meeting you go to work, or in this case it would be that you have practice, and then after work the media is always there because they're always there after practice, and the media's there and they've got the microphone in your face and they're saying, you were late today at practice and you've been late this week. How is that going to affect your ability to start, your ability to lead? Is the coach going to bench you? And why do you think that you should be playing even though you can't come to practice on time? And they're questioning you, and you were late because your kids have been sick all week.
Exactly. It is something that I think we try to kind of put. I don't know. There's distance that we put in between those things of like, oh, well, they're an athlete. It's a career path just like anything else, and we don't understand the compression that happens. I think the Olympic thing outlines that well. But even somebody like Shayne, he was able to have a nice long career, but he played 15 years. He had to do a lot in that 15 years because that's if those are your only money-making years, and that's very high, that's over the average for the NFL. Right. Certainly, if that's when you have to make your money, then you have to make a decent amount of money to make sure your family is set for the rest of your time, especially with the physical and mental toll it takes.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And while you're making that money, you've got, 2 million people or more critiquing you every day. When we make a mistake, we don't have that many people critiquing us. The professional athletes, they have somebody critiquing them. So then they still have to go to work, even though someone is talking about what they didn't do or why they should be playing, and still be able to come in every day and perform. I mean, if you can think about it, just regular everyday people, if you had that happening in your job, going into work, knowing people were slamming you and talking about you, but you still had to come and perform at the highest level, that's a hard thing to do. It's a really hard thing to do.
You can tell how well Shayne has formulated his mental mindset due to his work with you and the work you guys do together, because I'm usually the one that goes after the fans. He doesn't do it. I go after the fans as a fellow fan, basically saying, hey, guys, you gotta have some perspective on these things, and we try to enlighten people. He's usually more prone to give them a break and say, hey, they're fans. They paid to be here. They did this and that. But I'm with you, Wendy. They don't. I don't think they understand the perspective. And there is no, it makes me think of the Seinfeld where Jerry goes into the office and then boos somebody for their performance at like a publishing company. That's what I would, not that Shayne would ever do that, but it would be hilarious
Right.
to walk in a place and say, well, how do you like being booed and criticized for every move?
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Yeah, I know I would never be able to get him to do it. He's too even keeled of a guy, too nice of a guy. But yeah, that is something that people have to keep in mind. So we've kind of covered two facets. One of the things I was curious about, given my my government background, worked with a lot of military guys. You have an outfit that you partner with the Navy SEALs. I'd like to learn a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so when I was at the Olympics, I discovered that we could take Olympic hopefuls to Coronado and do quote unquote Navy SEALs training. It was part of for them to learn the mental toughness piece. I think when it comes to mental toughness, we can talk about it all day long, but until you actually do it and apply it, that's where you get to actually understand where you are in that space and how you can benefit it. And Navy SEALs training was actually perfect for that because we talk about it and then you go and do something it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt. So how do you get yourself in that mindset of knowing it's not going to feel good, but I still need to do this, right? And so it was something that we did. And as I was doing that, I just got connected with several of the SEALs, and we just got to talking, and they were putting together a company, and so we decided to come in together and started this company. And I'm no longer with the company. When I left the company and moved to Chicago, but they're still doing their thing. APG, they're still doing their thing and doing the Navy SEALs training, and just making it so where people can learn, companies and teams can learn how to be more resilient, learn how do the SEALs take what they've learned in training, and how can we turn that into, in the corporate training or into the battlefield on the field. And so that's what they did, and they're able to do that, and I believe quite successfully.
Well, I figured that might have been a snapshot in time because it must speak to all the mindset work you do, and obviously you're an expert at that with other people. But I do find that people, when they focus on their mindset and expanding that part, I think you're a good example of this because look at what you've been able to accomplish. I don't know how many things you're currently working on. We've covered a few of the past things, but you're expanding your capabilities by expanding your mindset and kind of looking more. I've talked about this on the show before, more of an abundance mindset rather than kind of limiting yourself. Is saying, hey, yeah, with mindset, here's what you could do, and you're a great example of that.
Yeah, and I'll say that my shift in career, it was solely based on wanting to make more time for family. I have twins and they hit middle school, and I was traveling so much with professional sports, and I was like, middle school is like the armpit of education. Like I gotta be more present, right? I gotta be more present mom, and so that's what it was about. And as I left and wanted to figure that out, it brought a whole new era of there's all of these things that I could do that I didn't think about because I've just been with, I can't say Jeff. Obviously I've had an amazing career with the Bulls and with the Olympics and with Navy SEALs, but this is more of like, oh wait, how can I expand what I've learned into different areas and help other people have the same advantages that these professional athletes have had. And so that's what, just trying to do that now. And with Shayne, and as we're working with, with Impact Engine Group, and that's what we're doing. We're taking all this information that we've learned, Dr. Phil and I, that we've learned what we've done and been able to put it together to help the professional athletes and the everyday person and being better. Because that's what I think ultimately that's all we all want to do. We just want to be better. And I like to say, I want to help people be better in their corner of the world, whatever that looks like. You don't need to be a professional athlete. You don't need to be Oprah Winfrey. You don't need to be, whomever. You just need to be the best you want to be, and let's help you do that.
We all can improve from mindset and mental work. That's kind of the primary point I was making at the beginning of the interview, that that's the part that we can improve the most. I think we have a tendency as a society to focus a little too much on the physical, on the outside, on the vanity, and not on what's inside, both from a character standpoint and a mental standpoint. And those are the things that really can grow and develop as we get older. Because yes, it's a hard reality that we all have to face, but you hit a certain point physically and it's only downhill from there. No matter what kind of work you do, your bone density is going down, your muscle is decreasing, all of those kinds of things, but you can still do a lot of work on the mental side of things and still maintain that upward arc on that side.
Absolutely. And you know, I think the biggest thing that I've learned is that you have to be open to it in order to do that, right? You have to be open to it. I mean, as you can imagine, in my career, I've run across lots of athletes that were not open to it. But you have to be open to that space, because as you were talking, I was thinking about like Kobe Bryant as he got older. You know, there were the shots that he was making, or what he was shooting was different than what he was doing when he was younger. I mean, LeBron is although LeBron's just an anomaly, right? Let's just say that. But I'm just saying that you change the way you play the game, and that is a mental piece, because you cannot physically do the things you were doing before. And so if you're open to the fact that you can still be as effective, but in different ways, and learning what that is a mental shift. And that's the piece that we're talking about. So you can still be doing those things, because your body just can't do what you were doing before, but it can still do something. And what do we do? How do we do that? How do we benefit you in that space?
That's amazing. It's a great service. And when I first hooked up with Shayne and we started the show out, I didn't realize how far he had gone in this space, because obviously he's got more the athletic background, but then he teamed up with you guys on the psychology side, and it's a very interesting outfit that you guys have going. Tell the audience a little bit more about it if they're interested in some of your services.
Yeah, so it is called, it's IEG, so Impact Engine Group. And so myself and Dr. Phil Dembo, and Phil's been doing this for 30 plus years, as you know, and I've been in there for 25 years. And so we've put our skills together. I mean, I do the mental performance piece. Phil does the visceral piece, which is the visceral piece is it's the emotion. It's the figuring out how you need to feel to perform your best at a given moment, and then bringing it up right then. And so he teaches you how to do that. So I come with a part of knowing what that piece is, and then he teaches you how to bring that piece up. And so it's just been a great connection. And then we were able to work with such amazing, retired players like Shayne. I mean, Shayne comes in with that space of, even though we can do this mental piece, we didn't play the sport. But when we can have someone like Shayne that can come in, that can talk to these athletes about, well, this is it, and this is what I did, it makes a big difference, as opposed to it's just us, right? And so we want to take the information that I have, that Phil has, that Shayne has, that Mike Matheny has, and be able to put that together to help athletes, professionals, or companies, whatever the case may be, how they can grow and develop and then maintain that growth at a steady pace.
We all have room to grow on this side of things. I think when people kind of think about that, sometimes it's like an insult. Like some people may have heard me say that and say, "Well, I'm good." Okay, well that's okay that you think that, and I'm glad you have confidence, but I'm saying that from my own perspective. I'm always focused on this stuff, and that's the nice part about the human experience. You can keep learning, you can keep growing, you can learn new things every day, and then stack those habits and those things that you learned on top of each other.
Yeah, absolutely. We want to keep growing and learning. I mean, as you said, Jason, that's it. I think that's how you develop into the person that you want to be and continually want to be, is that you want to continue to grow. Because if you're not growing, you're not changing, and life changes, right? I mean, what is that, the phrase, the only constant in life is change? That's it.
Exactly. You want to be ahead of it as much as you can, and then change and develop with life. But really appreciate you coming on. Just a note about, she was talking about Dr. Phil Dembo. We did an interview with him on the show on the March 12th episode, so feel free to look that up if you're listening to this. And want to have more information there for that piece that he does. But really appreciate you coming on. I could talk about this stuff all day, and I know you could too, but we don't want to take up too much of your valuable time. But appreciate you coming on, and feel free to send people to different social media handles or websites where they can get more information here.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. You can go to my website, which is Wendy Borlabi, so it's Wendy, W-N-D-Y, BORLABI.com, and then it's IEGperformance.com. And you can find me on all social media, and it's Dr. B, or Dr. Borlabi, BORLABI. That's all my social media handles, so you can find me there.
Perfect. Yeah, be sure to do that, because, like I said, I'll say it one more time. We all have room to grow, and these are great experts in these fields, and it's exciting stuff to be able to do this. So really appreciate you coming on the show, Dr. B, and hopefully we'll talk to you again another time.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you so much for having me. This has been awesome, and thank you for even having these conversations, because we need to do this more often.
Definitely, yeah. We'll look forward to having you back on the show, especially when Shayne's here. That'll change the conversation, and it's you can't talk enough about. We often talk about the mental health side on our shows, but yeah, the mental health side. But this is how you get ahead of that too. This is how you can kind of not get into the mental health issues that come with it. You get mindset growth ahead of that, and then get ahead of the game. So, no, really appreciate you coming on, and we'll look forward to having you back on here in the future.
Okay, thank you so much. Take care.
All right, you too, Dr. B. Thanks to Dr. Borlabi. Appreciate her coming on. Great stuff there. Really like talking about mindset things and mental health, as listeners know. But we're going to take a quick break and come back in studio and maybe start working on our Mount Rushmores here. So stick with us. You're listening to Shayne Graham's Extra Points on Jethro FM. Coming back here in studio with my buddy Steve Corsi and A.A. Ron. I've been thinking about this for a little bit, because we're sufficiently pumped up. We had Dr. Borlabi on. She gave us a lot of mindset advice. I like that. Be sure to check her out, and check Erik Schlitt's work out as well. Two very solid guests today. Excited to have Wendy back on when Shayne is here too, because it'll be fun to have both of them talking. We'll probably have Dr. Dembo back on at some point as well, because he was great when he was on, and I didn't get to talk to him. But we're gonna move to the Mount Rushmore space here, because I've been curious to have this conversation. Steve and I talk about this off air some of the time, talk about some of these sports radio kind of topics. And Aaron, to fill you in, so we had Al Karsten on last week from Pride of Detroit, and he mentioned something about someone, I forget who the player was. It was like DeAndre Levy, maybe, being on his Mount Rushmore. And we weren't even talking about DeAndre Levy. We weren't talking about Mount Rushmores. So then when we were headed into the break, I was like, okay, we've got to get your Mount Rushmore after the break. And it was the most random collection of players I've ever heard. It was like just picking them out with darts. It was Larry Warford. If you remember him, you give me a face. He was a guard back in the day, and he went over to the Saints. DeAndre Levy, he's a big Levi Orunzarike fan, so he may make it on there. He needs a little bit more time. This is the most random collection of players. So it made me think, like, who would people actually choose? Like, I gave you a little bit of time. Sometimes I put you guys on the spot, but this is an interesting one, because if I'm thinking of mine, I probably would have to have two, because I now have, because I'm fortunate enough through the show to have relationships with some of these former players. I have players that I know personally that, like, on my favorite players, I would have to put them on there, because I have a personal relationship with Eric Kramer, and he's become a friend of mine. I've had dinner with him. Ken Fantetti, same way. Those are guys that would, especially, Ken, those guys might be random, quote unquote, on a Mount Rushmore, but those guys would have to be on there. Zach Zenner as well. He was a back end running back, but I actually really did like him when he played, because he made the roster. He wasn't even supposed to make the roster, and through a lot of this work that we're talking about, like nutrition and mental toughness, he was able to do it. Now he does a lot of work in that space. So those guys would have to be on there. I've met Barry Sanders. He was very nice. Now that's back in the realm of who would actually be on a Mount Rushmore. So I'm curious, Aaron, do you have Did you have thoughts? You don't have to. If you don't have 4, that's okay. I'm putting you on the spot. But do you have thoughts on Mount Rushmores in general, Al Karsten's Mount Rushmore, or your own Mount Rushmore?
Well, if I had to pick 4, so obviously I'm going to go with like Barry Sanders, Calvin Johnson, and it depends on how far you want to go back, because I actually ended up Googling it in between. Bobby Lane, 1950s.
That's a classic
which,
one.
I mean, he's gotten there before. He's gotten to the championships before they were the Super Bowl, so I put him there. I don't want to put Matt Stafford in there, so I'm going to go with somebody pretty random.
I like it.
Kind of Jason Hansen.
Oh, that's a good one. That's probably that's a good one, especially since it fits with the branding too. Yeah, I mean we're a kicker based show, we're Shayne Graham's show, so that's a good one. I like that one a lot. Now, Steve, I know you're a fan of the NFL as a whole, so you could probably do a Lions one. But I'm curious about your Steelers one. The Steelers have a lot of good players here. Yeah. And there's a lot of different directions you could go. I know. So Aaron brought up an interesting point. We've talked about this off air that, is it people that you've seen in your lifetime? Mm-hmm. Obviously, Bobby Lane, he would get excluded for a lot of us. I mean, most people have not seen him because they were not back there in the championship days, because that was literally the pre-Super Bowl era that Bobby Lane was playing for him. But very important player for the Lions history. I think it's a very good pick. So the board's as open as you want it, but I'm curious about your thought process, because I could do one with the Steelers. It'd be very tough though, because you'd have to leave out some really, really good players no matter which direction you go.
Right. Yeah, no thanks. Thankful to be from Pittsburgh, and like you said, a lot of great players over the time. So to narrow it down, rule out the ones that have not witnessed, right? So like Joe Green, Franco Harris, obviously they'd be on top list, but so ones I would say from mid 80s on, that way, like personal, Troy Polamalu, top of the list.
That's a good choice.
That was one of the guys I think that I actually enjoyed watching the defense, maybe more than the offense, because he was just all over the field. Whether it's a pick six, sack strip fumble, like he was just fun to watch. I think for people who maybe even weren't Steelers fans, unless you were playing us, right?
Oh yeah.
So yeah,
he was one of my favorite players to watch as a Lions fan during that era.
Yeah, and then I'd say number 2. I think maybe some local would appreciate Jerome Bettis, because I think he's from Detroit, right?
Yeah.
And so,
and he's a Detroit style guy too.
Yeah,
the way he ran, his toughness, all of that stuff.
Yeah. I think those 2 people would appreciate, but then the other 2 maybe aren't as many people are fans of, but they have, I think, 2 of my favorite Steeler plays of all time. And one's Hines Ward, just the way he was a receiver that had the toughness and just had the great mentality, blocked downfield, all the things. And then the play I'm referring to is Antoine Randall in the Super Bowl, the trick play, Ben hands to Randall, and then to Hines Ward for a touchdown. That play was just incredible from Super Bowl 40 in Detroit. So yeah.
That was a classic one. I remember I was in Spain when that play happened, and Steve and I admittedly are big Antoine Randall fans, because he was a senior when we were freshmen in college. And I mean, I'm telling you though, this guy was an underrated college player.
Oh yeah.
The fact that, I'm interested to see where his career goes as a coach in the NFL, because he's got very unique experience. He played for a good amount of teams. He played multiple positions. No, he didn't play quarterback in the pros other than having a trick play like that. But he played receiver for a long time and never played it when he was in college. So the fact that he's able to coach that, I think he's got one of the more unique perspectives as a receivers coach, because he knows what the quarterbacks are looking for too, because he played that at a very high level. He was a Heisman alternate on a team with a losing record that had no other talent. This guy, if you haven't really seen him play, look up some, because as far as players that we've seen live, he's probably number 2, kind of 1A, 1B with Barry Sanders as far as kind of the level of being impressed by the level of his play. And people in this area might not look at those as the same type of player. I get it, but look up the college footage and then try to disagree with me, because he was a good player. So he's not the 4th one though, Steve.
No,
he's just part of the play.
Yeah, the 4th one is again, maybe some people don't appreciate, some controversial, but James Harrison, just the Steeler toughness. I think he played in the right era because I think he played right now. A lot of personal fouls probably thrown out of some games. But and that player I referred to there was Super Bowl 43 where he had the pick six on Kurt Warner where he went the length of the field. And that was just one of the most incredible plays I've ever seen. I'm a little biased to be a Steelers fan, but just the way he pulled that off was pretty cool. So, yeah.
That's a good one. That's a very solid list. And I'm sure Hines Ward is the type of guy that I'm sure there's a lot of Lions fans that listen to the show and go, oh, Hines Ward, he kind of got on my nerves. I'll tell you what, that would be one of Dan Campbell's first choices for receiver if he could have a modern day Hines Ward, a guy that blocks like that, guy that's always in the right spot, a very smart player, another guy that had quarterback experience in his past that I think helped him out. So that's a good one. So now it's funny because usually I'm the one kind of controlling the whole thing here, so I'm the only one that's not on the spot, although a lot of it is kind of off the cuff anyways. But I don't know that I have one. Like I said, the one for me, the first one would be kind of my favorites because of my personal relationships with them. If I took that part out, then you're probably leaving Barry in there. He brought a lot of good memories. I am going to throw you a random one, though, here, Aaron, because you're talking about Jason Hansen. I might have to seal that one. We'll see what happens with 3 and 4. But one of my favorite players growing up was Jerry Ball. I don't know if you remember him. You'd be a little bit too young for him, but he was a defensive lineman. I now actually own one of his game used jerseys, and he was a defensive lineman. He really had a tendency to muck everything up in the defensive line, and good underrated player. But I always liked him growing up. Another one that's kind of a random one from the era that I grew up in, but a player that should be in the Hall of Fame probably. We've talked about him on the show actually in his Hall of Fame case with Eric Kramer because he was his starting left tackle, Lomas Brown. He's I think 8-time maybe All-Pro, something like that. But very, very good player. He'd have to be in there. And yeah, that last spot's a tough one because now I think Hansen's a good one. Hard to not put Kelvin Johnson on there, considering he's got the longevity with the Lions. Yes, he retired slightly early, and now that's back into discussion with the whole Ragnow thing in the mix, but yeah, that would be a tough one to exclude. But yeah, it's fun to talk about. Just it gives people. I think it's going to be interesting to watch talk about this with some of the beat writers because you're going to get a perspective of how they look at the game. That's how Al Karsten looks at the game. Is he's looking at a left guard that played there for 3 years, a middle linebacker. Those are the types of players that he keeps an eye out for. So it's interesting stuff. But we'll take a quick break and then we'll come back and close the show up. So stick with us. You're listening to Shayne Graham's Extra Points on Jethro FM. Want to thank you for joining us on the on National Name Yourself Day. We kind of got some legs out of that. I don't think Dr. Borlabi would change her name. I think she just went with Dr. B, and we didn't ask her that, but she was a great guest, and be sure to check her information out. Same with Erik Schlitt. He's got a ton of information. He named all the things that he does. He's a prominent writer at Pride of Detroit, but he's got all those side endeavors where I'm sure he could be doing a lot more things, but he's just doing more Detroit content with those other things. So great resource for the draft coverage there. Appreciate Ron keeping us on track here. We got him in the show a decent amount, which I always like doing. I can't see anything he's doing. I think some of the audience is familiar with the idea that I usually point out what he's doing over there. We have these screens in studio now. It's like I don't know how he's doing or what he's doing, but appreciate. I like the Mount Rushmore, Aaron. I think that was a good one, and so we'll have to do that maybe with more folks on the show, both on the beat writing side and maybe the producer and in studio side. Speaking of in studio, glad Steve Corsi could join us, my buddy that's here visiting. Good stuff on the Steelers. We had good Steelers content that'll keep some of the Steelers fans happy because we're not only Michigan based anyways. We're a Michigan based show, but we're national and international online, both on Jethro FM, but we also have the podcast as well. So other people are listening to this. So we appreciate your Steelers coverage and joining us in studio here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. to be
Yeah,
here.
definitely. Yeah, fun stuff. And thanks to Shayne, as always. Good stuff from him, and we'll have him back on next week. So be sure to tune into that. But tune into the rest of the Jethro lineup as well. We've got the Sports Project from 10 to 12 on Saturday with the Sports Professor. Then you've got the Polka Pops and Polka Overtime. You got to tune into that with MLB and the rest of the crew. Jeff Isaac has the All Request Show on Saturday nights. Be sure to tune into that. I think he'll use these computers that we're not using currently. So hopefully we didn't need them. But Jeff Isaac's got a great show on Saturday. Then we've got Sports Intel on Monday nights, 7 to 9. So be sure to tune into that. We'll be talking some Red Wings and Pistons and Tigers next week. I know people aren't happy with some of those teams, but we'll be talking to some local experts about that. Then Wednesday will be Sports Project Prime Time, 7 to 9. Be sure to tune in to Conrad and Rowdy Yates during the day. Conrad during the morning and early afternoon time frame, and then Rowdy Yates 2 to 7. And then, of course, tune into Extra Points next week from 7 to 9 and join Shayne and I and whoever else is here in studio. And we'll have another good week. We'll be leading up to the draft here. We're going to be doing some draft coverage because we'll be on for the first portion of the draft here in a couple weeks. So we'll be doing a very draft-heavy show. Next week, we'll have Mark Levin and Daniel Flick, who does a national mock draft. And then Mark Levin is one of the experts on kind of the NFLPA and draft negotiation. So we're excited to have him on. We'll also likely have a Lions rep as well. So a lot of draft heavy stuff. And then we'll get ready for basically doing the draft live, the first part of it in a couple weeks. But thanks for kicking it with us, and we'll talk to you next week.
This episode is brought to you by Encore Business Group, Erik Schlitt Aesthetic and General Dentistry, Williams Chiropractic, Elite Winning Solutions, and Sal's Complete Home Painting and Handyman Services. Shayne Graham's Extra Points with Ron Walsh airs live Thursdays, 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern on Jethro.fm.